And after birthing my son, I just thought I came so close to having a different experience. My doctor was trying to prep me psychologically for a C-section. She literally cited 12 reasons why she, quote, liked giving them. So there was a lot of rhetoric and very little education. She said things like, I don't like if the mother is too small, if she's too big, if she goes into labor late, if she goes in early. And she actually used her pinky to draw on my lower abdomen where she would be placing the incision and said, Cynthia, a bikini will cover up the scar later. This is what she said to a healthy, thriving, low-risk young woman.
Yeah.
So I had to leave her, and I ended up with this incredibly fulfilling, beautiful experience that changed my life. And when I had that experience, for whatever reason, I just couldn't stop reading about birth. I started publishing in the field. I would talk to everyone and anyone about birth, and I started to care a lot about other women's experiences because I recognized this would have been devastating to me if I didn't feel at peace with my birth experience. And in fact, it is devastating to women. What I learned in that journey is that we are literally the most dangerous place in the world to give birth, in the whole industrialized world.
That's crazy. In America?
In America. So you tell me how many American women will know this fact, that she is statistically safer flying on a plane and going to Moscow, going to Turkey, going to Egypt, literally every Eastern and Western European nation, and nations in Africa. On every continent, there are countries that are statistically safer than the United States. Now, that's hard for us to believe because we always hear the rhetoric that this is the best healthcare in the world, the best healthcare in the world. Is it? In some ways, yes. If you're going to have a premature baby, heaven forbid, at 28 weeks, this is a wonderful place to be. The problem is that with this rising maternal mortality rate we have in the United States, unnecessary medical intervention has been identified as the major contributor to that trend. We're the only nation out of all these dozens of nations that has become progressively more dangerous since the mid-'80s. Mm-hmm. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to tell everyone what happened in the 80s that changed everything.
Mm-hmm. Please.
In the 1980s, that's when the cesarean rate started to increase. For decades and decades, it was always between 2 and 4.5%. In 1970, it became the first year in the United States that the cesarean rate became a whopping 5%, 1 in 20 women going into major surgery in order to give birth. Now, why does this matter? Because when a woman has a cesarean section, she's at least 5 times as likely to die as when she has a vaginal birth. Now, obviously, it's a life-saving surgery when it's genuinely needed, but the vast majority of the time, it turns out it's not genuinely needed. And even ACOG, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, have corroborated those figures. They're saying this is a much more dangerous way to give birth. So in 1970, it was 5%. In 1980, it was immediately 10% because we hit that critical mass. Society got more comfortable with it. Obstetricians became more comfortable with it. And the World Health Organization tried to announce to all the nations, United States, what are you doing? Be careful. And while the World Health Organization was recognizing our increasing cesarean rate, something remarkable happened in Congress. Ronald Reagan was president. It was around 1986 to 1987 is when this happened. And I want to remind everyone or tell everyone that in the 80s, the corporate tax rate, the federal corporate tax rate, was between 46 and 51%. Now, I believe in George Bush Jr.'s years, it went down to like 30-something%. I don't remember exactly. I might be confusing it with the personal tax rate, but it was in the 30-something%, 35-ish. Donald Trump, it went down to 21%. It used to be 46 to 51%. So corporations didn't like very much, obviously, that they had to hand over half of their profits to taxes. Well, what happened in the 80s was that the pharmaceutical and hospital lobby partnered and appealed to Ronald Reagan's Congress with a brilliant idea that changed the United States completely. They said, we really don't like paying all these taxes as hospitals. Can you give us the status of a nonprofit? Can we let ourselves be called nonprofits so that we don't pay federal income tax? However, please give us a loophole. Let our executives make multi-million-dollar salaries. Let us have multi-million-dollar advertising budgets. Let us pay corporate bonuses. So what appears to be a .org is in fact a .com. And the problem with that is conflicts of interest abounded.
Yeah.
So what happened with that cesarean rate, which was 10% now in the 80s, that's exactly when things got worse for women. The safest year to give birth in this country was 1987, and we've been downhill ever since. So in the early 90s, it became not 1 in 10 women. Immediately, it was 1 in 5 women going into surgery for birth. By the late 90s, it was 1 in 4 women. And today it's 1 in 3. And in affluent metropolitan areas, it's 1 in 2.
Wow.
And we have consistently increasing maternal mortality rates to show for it, while every single other nation, literally every other industrialized nation, has improved in the opposite direction over the same years.